I heard this story 12 years ago from a friend of mine while I was attending college in Jeju Island. From this point on, the story is from my friend's perspective. I got accepted to a college I applied for, but I had to get a dorm room because my home was located too far from my school. The dorm room was designed for 3 residents, so I shared the space with a student who had returned to school after 2 years of break and was 5 years older than me. Let's call him Lee. And the other student was the same age as me. Let's call him Kim for this story. We got chummy in no time because Lee was very considerate and Kim, being the same age, was easy to become friends with. During weekends, we would often smuggle liquor into our dorm, then get drunk and have fun. It was one of those weekends when we smuggled in some liquor and we were drinking with some chicken on the side. Lee thought it'd be fun to share some scary stories, so we all took turns to tell our own creepy tales. When it was Kim's turn, he said he wanted to tell a story about his hometown. He mentioned there was a way to call a spirit and that the method was passed down through generations in his hometown. The method was very simple. First, turn off all the lights in the house, and when it's completely dark, try to locate the part of the house that feels the coldest. Once the spot has been located, face that direction and say your greetings every day until you see the spirit. I think back now, and it sounded like a bunch of kakamimis, but we were so drunk at the time that we didn't have the capacity to think rationally. To top things off, we lived on the first level of the dorm building, so we used to get lots of cold draft coming in from a bunch of different places. Mix in some alcohol, a crazy meth, and the perfect condition to test out that meth, and you could sort of understand the situation we were in. We turned off the lights, found a cold spot, faced that direction, and said, "Hello? How are ya?" Obviously, we knew no ghost would say hi back to us. No matter how intoxicated we all knew it was some urban legend. We turned the lights back on, giggled at our own stupidity, and continued drinking. The next night, Lee insisted that he will continue with the spirit greeting because the deal was that you needed to do it every day until the spirit appeared. Some nights, he said, "Hi, how are ya?" Some others, "Hi, would you please drop by our home once?" Then there was the, "You came again. How you doing?" He kept it up for over a week, and it really looked like he was actually talking to someone. Then this one night, Lee's face is pale and full of concern. He walks towards me and Kim and says, I saw a ghost." He told us that the ghost said hi to him first by the door. He used to kid around a lot, so we responded accordingly like he was messing with us. But then Lee got mad at us and he angrily told us he was disappointed in us. Following that night, Lee continued to have conversations with seemingly the thin air. He faced towards the direction of the door and just carried on with the conversation. Lee refused to speak to us and he was acting like a jerk, so I lay down pretending to go to sleep and I tried to snoop in on the conversation. "What? He's not sleeping yet?" I almost had a heart attack when I heard those words. He must have turned around to see for himself that I wasn't asleep, because our eyes locked when I opened them to see what the hell he was up to. He gazed at me with eyes filled with hatred. He then got up and went outside of the dorm. The next night, I spoke to Kim about the incident. Kim, being who he is, a really laid-back nice guy type, said it was probably the stress getting to him. Like I mentioned earlier, Lee was 5 years older than us, so he would soon face the rigors of job search. Kim's advice was not to mind him too much. All good in words, but we live in the same dorm. How do I just ignore all of Lee's strange behaviors? At that point, I didn't know whether Lee was putting on an act because he was mad at us for not believing him, or if he was truly hearing things, not as in spirits, but rather going nuts. That night, Kim and I pretended to go to bed and kept our ears open to listen in on Lee's nightly madness. Like clockwork, Lee began having a conversation with the thin air by the door as soon as the whole world went to bed. He suddenly got up in the middle of the conversation and said these words that I can never forget. "Yeah, I'm sick and tired of it as well. Shall we leave together? I think it's best that we leave now." Lee said those words and he just left the dorm. Kim and I felt that the best thing to do was to wait until he came back. But then Lee didn't come back even after an hour, and he wouldn't answer his mobile either. We realized the gravity of the situation, so we went out to look for him ourselves. We searched for him everywhere around the dorm buildings, but we couldn't find him anywhere. Our next option was to speak to the security guards, but the man we spoke to didn't care much. He just said it's probably stress and suggested that we wait for Lee until morning. The day broke and Lee still hadn't come back. He didn't call us all night, and when it was clear his battery was drained, we called the cops and filed a missing persons report. Days later, Lee's body was found on the rooftop of the dorm. He had committed suicide by slashing his own wrist. The door to the rooftop was always locked. We couldn't understand how he could have possibly accessed it in the first place. We told the cops everything that happened leading to the suicide, but why would the cops believe a story that we couldn't believe ourselves? There was no sign of struggle or anything that might indicate foul play. The police closed the investigation as suicide. I left the dorm for good right after the incident. I couldn't possibly stay there staring at that door all day long. Even now, I sometimes wake up to the voice of Lee talking. Would it be my guilt playing tricks with my mind? Perhaps I feel guilty for not stopping him from going out that night. The fact is, I'll never be able to forget what happened to him. I still can't conclusively say it was or wasn't a spirit that made Lee commit suicide. However, anytime I read or hear about people wanting to raise or make contact with a spirit, I just want to stop them. This is something I experienced in high school. I attended a boarding school for high school. This meant the students' lives revolved around the school all day long. We had to attend the classes, that's given, but when the regular class schedule ends, we had to attend the so-called free study class. They call it as if it's voluntary, but it really wasn't what it sounded like. All students were obligated to attend this class and study on their own for a few hours. Only when the quote-unquote free class was finished, we were allowed to go rest in our dorms. Each dorm room was assigned to 4 students. It took a little getting used to at first. It was the first time I was away from my parents, and I was sharing the room with 3 other kids that I had never met before. It was really awkward at first. It was only after a few days after I enrolled in this school, after the free class, all 4 roomies came back to the dorm and we said our awkward hellos to one another. We got ready for bed and we split up into 2 groups since we had bunk beds on each side of the wall. I had dibs on the bottom bunk and I was about to close my eyes when I heard the girl on the upper bunk singing. After listening to it for a few seconds, I realized that she was singing the school song, the song that basically represents our school. We all started giggling because it was just ridiculous that she sang the school song out of nowhere. Soon enough, we all joined in on the fun, and the 4 of us sang together, all the while still giggling uncontrollably. I suppose it kinda felt good because we had found a common ground on something. But late at night and with everyone sleeping, it didn't take long for the dorm manager to take notice. The dorm managers were school teachers who take turns to stay as watchdogs overnight. We were chastised for the singing, and the manager promptly left afterwards. We giggled quietly after she left, and we were about to call it a night when the girl who initially sang the song began singing again. We were all tired, and none of us wanted to get in further trouble, so this time no one sang with her. The singing continued, but then all of a sudden the girl from the upper bunk said angrily, "Can you stop singing? For God's sake, let me get some rest." Me and the other girls were shocked by her behavior, She was the one singing, and she had the nerve to chastise the rest of us. Things got awkward very quickly. The fact that she spoke to us so rudely was uncalled for, since we really didn't know each other that well. And there was something odd as well. She spoke like someone who just woke up from her sleep, so it was peculiar through and through. None of us said a word afterwards, and we just lay there in the darkness, all of us feeling uncomfortable. Only a few seconds went by when we heard the girl from my upper bunk sing again. I was ticked off this time. I got up, turned the lights on to give her a piece of my mind, but then we all ended up running and screaming into the hallway. There was no one on the upper bunk of my bunk bed. There were 3 people in the room and not 4. Just as the same, only 3 of us were trembling out in the hallway. The dorm manager came running towards our room. She checked the room for us, but there was no one else in there. She went door to door around the dorm building, and we later found out that the 4th girl was actually sleeping in the dorm room of her friend. I don't even know how we fell asleep that night. All 3 of us must have stayed awake for as long as we could, until the fatigue simply made us faint. After that night, if you were alone in the room, you could sometimes hear the humming of that song. We asked the school to give us another room, but there were no other vacant rooms, and by the time we asked for it, the entire school already knew the story about the ghost, so no one in the right mind would give up their room for ours. So from that night, we always stayed in a group of minimum 2 people. At least after that night, the humming wasn't heard as long as we weren't alone in the room. We were able to escape the room only after finishing the freshman year. We may have been free of whatever haunted us for a year, but the nightmare continued on for the new occupants of the room. Many years after graduation, I met a person who attended the same high school, but about 10 years after I had graduated. As it turns out, the school's enrollment shrunk with each year after our story went viral with the students. Not only the school had many empty rooms available now, but they were also forced to shut down that room because it was bad for business. Even today as an adult, it still chills me to think of that night. If I were given 3 wishes from a genie, I'd use one to wipe the memories of that room from my mind.